certain films, depending on when you're born, can really make such an impact on, you know, the generation that grow up with it. And it sort of places a lot of impetus to sort of make it as good as possible, because it is going to be out there in the world and people are going to see it, and you want it to, you know, really have an impact. Thank you for having me. I think RealWorks as a program is awesome. Thank you, Abby, for inviting Blue Sky, inviting me. Um, and I'm so excited and honored to, you know, take a small part in this amazing program. I wish, I told these guys in an earlier meeting, I wish I had a program like this when I was growing up, because, you know, film studies and animation, it just wasn't that accessible at the time, especially. And having a program like RealWorks available is huge. And then being able to bring in, you know, artists from the industry to talk about their specific discipline is I mean, we do that at Blue Sky. We you know, Deb is on the call now. Deb makes sure to bring in all these professionals to talk to us as professionals and to inspire us. But you guys are getting it at this age is phenomenal. It really is. So kudos to RealWorks for the program. So I'm going to talk, I know you guys have had talks from different professionals. So my specific specialty is animation. So my talk is going to be focusing on that and the different aspects of the animation process. So I'm one of the directors at Blue Sky Studios. I just wanted to give you a little background of who I am. So I've been there over 20 years now. It's hard to believe. And just a little background, personal background of myself. You know, like Noor, my family and I immigrated and settled down in New York City when I was about 10 years old. So I grew up in Queens, and I've been, you know, I live in Queens now. So I've been in New York ever since. And growing up, I've always been interested in drawing or comic books, you know, watching animation, watching movies. But it wasn't until high school where I really discovered my passion for art. And I thought about it more seriously as something to pursue as a career. You know, I was really lucky. I went to St. Francis Prep. It's a Catholic high school, but I had a great teacher there. And I remember one of the classes I took with him was sort of intro to animation. And a pivotal moment for me was when he brought in, you guys probably won't even know what this is, but like he brought in the laser disc. This is like a medium that came and went super quick, but it's this giant, like, you know, disc that you would put in a player. But in it was a version of Disney's Beauty and the Beast. It was a work in progress that they had actually submitted to the New York Film Festival. And that to me was such a big eye opener. It was like the curtains had been pulled back. And what the film did for me was it showed more clearly the process and the artistry that is in that film. And so they submitted it like still in progress. Like, you know, they probably thought blemishes and all, but it was actually really beautiful to see storyboards, rough storyboards, background paintings, pencil tests, cleanup of the pencil tests, and then finished animation cells. You know, just all of it was there. And, you know, it wasn't even the final cut of the film, but it was just so great to see the process and what artists at Disney are watching on a daily basis. Like, this is the film they're building, and to share that to the world. And I think it might have even won some awards during that festival. So it was really well received. I think it was one of the few animated films that was actually nominated for Best Picture, not Best Animated Film, Best Picture. So that one really, that one was for me, that was sort of the one that, you know, really had an impact on me. And that's when I really started to think about animation as a career, like seriously as a career. So from that point on, I was hooked. I really wanted to work in feature animation, like period, and specifically animation, because I love to draw. And to me, it was so magical to draw something, and then to, you know, through the, you know, persistence of vision, to be able to sort of play 24 images at speed, and to be able to move an audience, to be able to share an experience, to share a character with the audience is really, it still gets me. It's really magical. So I ended up going to Pratt Institute, which is in Brooklyn. Most of you guys who are in Brooklyn. I studied to become a 2D animator, and Pratt isn't an animation school, so I studied a lot of drawing, like drawing from life, I took 2D animation classes, and they didn't have that many because, again, animation wasn't something that was like popular yet. Like, I think the schools took a few years for the schools to catch up. Took some filmmaking classes, and I think by the time I was in the third year, I had literally hit a wall. Like, I had taken all the animation classes Pratt had to offer, and the only animation classes I could take were CG animation classes. And I remember at the time, my 2D animation friends were like, "Don't take that class. You're selling out. Like, that's not real animation. The computer is doing all the work." And I was like, I was desperate to take animation classes, so I took it anyway. Um, so in taking my first 3D animation class, and I did not know how to use a computer. You have to imagine this was a different time. I didn't grow up with a computer on my lap. Like, this was something that we all had to like learn and adapt. So I, no cell phones, guys. Like, this is like, I didn't even have a cell phone. I know it's hard to imagine, but like, these were the days. Like, you still use the payphone, and like, emailing was not something everybody did yet. So I took, and we were using SGIs, which are super expensive machines, like $20,000 machines, just to do basic animation. Like, nowadays you get free software online, which is like just a completely different time. I took my first animation class, and I had a great teacher. He was really encouraging, really supportive, but at the same time, he wasn't necessarily an animation teacher. He was like an expert in using the software. So when he gave his first assignment, I remember doing like a simple ball bounce test, and I did like he asked us to do some animation with like a basic like rectangle, right? And I did some stuff with it, and he's like, "Wow, you really know how to animate." Like, and I'm like, "I don't know how to use a computer, but I did learn some animation in my previous years." And he actually recommended me for a freelance job that he knew somebody was hiring for. So they needed 3 animators as one of the 3 that was hired. The other one was a stop motion animator, and another one was somebody who was more experienced. So I was the student newbie, but that's where I really learned how to animate on a computer. And my mentor at the time was like a pretty well-known stop motion animator. He had worked on, James and the Giant Peach. He's a super amazing animator. So I got really lucky. I got good mentorship, and that was phenomenal for me, and that was huge. And that sort of was the stepping stone for having enough work pulled together on my reel to then, after graduating, I then had enough work, some commercial work, to then submit to a place like Blue Sky. And at the time when I was looking for work after college, this is the thing you do. You just send it everywhere. You just send it to whoever wants to take your reel, and you had to send like a VHS tape or a 3/4 inch tape at the time. So it was a little costly, but that's how you did things at the time. And I remember spending the summer off and just like waiting for a call back. And I got a call or 2 back from, some gaming studios, which, I should really be thankful I had those kind of like looking to be interested to hire me. But I was honestly not thrilled, because I'm like, oh, I love playing games, but I don't want to work in gaming. I just knew that the animation potential would be a little more, at least at the time, a little more limited. I'd have to do sort of like run cycles and like, first person stuff, like, jab left, jab right. And I was like, oh, I don't really want to do that. I really wanted to do feature animation. And then this was right around the time Bunny came out and had won an Oscar. And a friend of mine ran into somebody who works at Blue Sky in the street, and they mentioned, "Hey, if you could put a good word in for Galen, like he's looking for some animation work." And a couple of days later, I got a call from Chris Wedge, and he left a message on my parents' answering machine, like old school answering machine. And I remember playing back. I'm like, and he was saying like, "Listen, I don't have a job yet, but we might have a job. We're gearing up for a feature, Ice Age now, and if we do get the gig, like we need to hire animators. We'd love to have you at Blue Sky." And so I basically turned down the gaming offers because I really wanted to hold out for a feature film. Like, that was my dream. And if I could, out of the gates, if I could get something like that, it would be huge. And so that happened. And, I started at Blue Sky. I started as an animator. And it was so early on the Ice Age journey at the time that we didn't even have 3D models or rigs yet. So, that's when I started doing some story work. Like, I knew how to draw well enough to do some basic story work. I worked under, at the time it was Dan Schuffelman, who He's an experienced story artist, and I sort of helped in some of his scenes. And then when animation was ready, I was an animator, and then so that was an amazing experience just to be part of that. I think there were 17 animators for that entire um, film, which today is like unheard of. We have 75 plus animators now working on any given film. So it was a real gift at the time to actually have a really small crew, because you got to touch more of the scenes in the movie. And at the time, actually, I was sort of dubbed like the Sid lead, because different animators will animate Sid differently, and sort of Chris liked the way I handled Sid and early on, and sort of I got more of the Sid scenes. So after Ice Age, sort of one thing led to another, and became a lead, and then and became a supervisor. So on Dawn of the Dinosaurs, that was, I think, my first supervisory experience. So I worked very closely with Carlos, who is the director on that one. And as a supervisor, that's when you really start to get that sort of larger exposure to the filmmaking process. So I started to see outside of animation. I started to see what it was like to work in a story department. I started to see what editing was all about, and even like rigging and lighting. Sort of get more of the overall view. And as a supervisor, you also work with the director very closely. So that was sort of my the first taste I got in like, hey, maybe I want to direct someday. Maybe this is something I want to do. And so it took me, I think it took about 10 years or so before Blue Sky, tapped me on the shoulder and basically said, hey, would you like to direct, a short? And it was a Sid short. It was called Surviving Sid. And I did that, and that was a phenomenal experience. That's when I really got a little taste of what it's like to take something from script all the way to, like final film, working with writers for the first time, like directly, and then working on the entire process. And then also aspects of the process that I wasn't privy to yet until that point is sort of the post-production process, which is, working with a composer, like that's a whole set of skills you just have to learn on the job, learn as you go, and talk about what you're looking for, the feeling you're looking for, and what kind of sounds they can help support your film with. And, working with an orchestra, or just really, you're just watching at that point. The composer's doing most of the work. Color correction, like I just had to train my eye to pick up on these things. But ultimately, as a director, you're really just trying to oversee the larger vision, and you don't have to be an expert in everything. And that's why you have your cinematographer. That's why you have your editor. That's why you have your art director, production designer, supervising animator. These guys are all the experts. So, directors don't have to know everything. You just have to sort of hold on to the vision of what you want to say and how you want to say it in the film, and everybody else is going to help you, support you in saying that. I thought I'd start out with a sizzle reel. For those of you who are not as familiar with Blue Sky's work, this is just kind of a compilation of what we've done as a studio. So I'm just going to let it play. Can you guys hear that okay? So these are the films we worked on. The last one that we've released is Spies in Disguise, and we're working on one titled Nimona at the moment, and that's one based on a graphic novel, and it's gonna release beginning of 2022, and that one looks super exciting. I'm not directly involved in it aside from maybe just giving screening notes and and things like that. But I'm super excited about that one. I think that one's going to be a real, you know, a real milestone for Blue Sky, and I think for animation. So I'm really stoked about that one. It takes a village to make one of these movies. You know, we have over 500 plus staff employees working together to create a film. Animation to me is like the ultimate collaboration medium. So, you know, everything you see in the movie had to be created by an artist or a technician. Everything, like characters, props, elements that you wouldn't normally think of, like water, smoke, buildings, even shadows. All of it needed to be thought about, designed, and created. So everything you see in the finished film, believe me, is intentional and has been scrutinized to death, like probably more than is healthy. um, these are some of the artists behind our films. You know, we've hired artists, you know, obviously nationwide, internationally as well. We have brought different artists in. It's just really based on your skill set and your ability to contribute to the films. So those unique people and artists all work together with the same goal, making the best movie possible. There's about 25 departments, a mix of artistic, technical, and production-minded folks. In a perfect world, the pipeline should work like a river system, but in reality, it works more like this. You guys got all that? I'm not sure what the slide is actually showing, but it does give you a sense that things are not linear and that people work on top of each other. So there is a general flow of things moving forward, but sometimes this river goes backwards and sideways. So, and that's just part of the process that you just have to embrace. It's a little chaotic, but that's the way it's supposed to be, I guess. So going right into story, after we have a script that we like, the story department is where it all begins. And the story artists work closely with the script, the writers, and the directors. They start to flesh out the ideas, pitch their own ideas. You know, story artists really begins to take the words on the script and draw individual story panels. In fact, hundreds and thousands of these panels. Like nothing is precious to them, and they're looking for the best way to tell the story. And when you start to put it together, it starts to resemble a comic strip.
I wanted to ask a question. What program do you guys use for like animation? Like, is it tailored made software for the studio, or is it like a program that anyone can get?
Right now, it's Maya. And on top of that, we have programmers in-house that will also, that's part of the production engineering group, and they will sort of add on like, you know, extra things that will make it a little bit easier. So potentially animators could request for a specific feature that will make their workflow smoother, and that programmer will actually write specific software for the department.
Oh,
so
that's pretty cool.
easier. Yeah, it is cool, and we're lucky to have that.
What I wanted to ask was, do you have any tips for anyone who's looking to get into the animation industry? And this can kind of range from like anywhere from like creating your reel to what studios are looking for when they're hiring new animators.
Well, typically for animation, you know, you obviously need to have some animation on your reel. Typically what we look for is your ability to create a character, to tell a story. A lot of people would think of animation as like, oh, it's just fun to make things move. But really, there's the art behind animation. And really, at least for feature animation studios, we're very interested in storytelling. We're very interested in your ability to create a unique piece of moment, or you know, something that's entertaining. I mean, there's, you know, it's having enough of that on your reel that will sort of get your foot in the door. And I think even for internships, if you show enough sort of potential in that area, even if it's not, you know, we're not looking for, obviously, like, you know, we know that these are students coming up. So it doesn't have to be super polished, but as long as the raw potential is there, I think that's enough. And you know, it doesn't hurt to have some drawing background, because it just shows the supervisors or the leads in animation that you have a particular eye for observation. It's really what it is about drawing. It's sort of, you know, your ability to observe and to capture something on paper. I will say that not everybody in animation can draw. It's just one of those things where it's like, it would be a nice add-on and might set you apart, but it's not a necessity by any means.
How does one make a character? I've noticed how one of the characters in The Spies in Disguise looks a lot like Will Smith. Like, is this like by choice? Like would you like at last minute like decide that the character will have to look like have like if it represents like the voice actor, or is it just like does it just fit in?
That's a really, really good question. It's actually a really nice segue into design and modeling and building characters. But I'll just answer the question anyway. Actually, with Lance, the human version of Lance, he was already designed before Will Smith was ever a thought. And so I think it's a little bit more coincidental that he may resemble Will Smith. And I think a lot of that, I know a lot of questions that we get. It's like, oh man, you really captured the mannerism of that that actor. And I think a lot of it, honestly, is I mean, yes. I mean, obviously, when you have a character performance from somebody as amazing as Will Smith, he has a way of performing his lines. He has a cadence and a rhythm to his performance and his brand of comedy that the animator will hang everything off of. So in that way, it is very, very much inspired by that sort of structure, that template of what the actor gives you. But at the same time, the animators are actually, they are infusing a lot of themselves in the character. So in terms of answering, how do we design the characters? Like, I'm just gonna dive right in because that's perfect for this next section. While the story and the script are being worked on, during that time, designers are responsible for the visual look of the entire movie. So everything, color, characters, environmental design, everything you see needs to be designed through the design department. On Spies, we took a really sculptural approach. It was taken, and that approach defined the film's stylized look. So the characters, the sets, the props, even the animation was dictated through this sort of stylized choice of the design. Each character's silhouette is iconic, it's clean, defined by straight lines and simple curves. And the proportions are more on the caricature side instead of the realistic side. So we had a film like Epic, very naturalistic, closer to realism. This is much more caricatured. So after the 2D designs are solid and we feel like, okay, we've got the characters and we're excited about them, all right, we take it out for a test drive and we see how it holds up animated in 2D animation form. And we like to do these 2D tests for several reasons. We want to make sure the aesthetics drive the rigging and the modeling part of the process, not the other way around. Often if you build the models and you rig them without knowing what your targets are, the models and the level of detail that you build into it will dictate what the performance range is. So we want to kind of say, this is what the performance range is, now build a model based on what the target is. And so that's what these are for. So once a 2D test like this is shown and the director's like, yes, that's our character and we love the range there, this would then be a test that you could show the entire pipeline from like modeling, rigging, animation, materials, fur. Now everybody can see, oh, you want the cheeks to be that puffy? Okay, now we got to build in enough detail for that so it holds up. And oh, you want the mouth to get that big? Oh, we got to plan for that. Now we got to make sure that when that mouth drops, it doesn't affect his bow tie in a negative way. So then it starts to inform, oh, okay, we're going to build this Lance pigeon in a very specific way, knowing this is your target. So it's very, very, very useful in that sense. And we do that not just for the pigeon, but also for the human Lance, for Walter, for all the main characters that need that sort of range.
What makes a design authentic to you?
I think you really need to understand the character that you want. And I think with Lance, we wanted him, he's a character that in the beginning of the film, he flies solo and he's confident. He's got a lot of swagger. It really informs, like the way he's designed should feel easy, not a lot of effort, because I think it'll exude that confidence. And I think that's when you start to get into the authenticity of the truth of who the character is. Once you bring your character in, you should kind of get a sense of his personality kind of right away. If you understand your character, everything, all the choices you make, if they fall under that understanding, it'll feel authentic to the character.
I'm wondering what are some elements of good storytelling in animation, and what are some moments that are example of great storytelling that you've seen?
Wow, it's a really, really good question. Storytelling in animation, I'd say, is not any different from any kind of storytelling, whether it's through books or, any movies, live action movies you've seen. And, I mean, everybody will have their own version of like what's great storytelling. For us in animation, if we can tell the story and move the audience in a profound way, to move an audience to laugh or to cry, is without dialogue, preferably, would be really great, sort of pristine storytelling. Like that to me is great. Like when you can move an audience through the performance, through the pacing of the film, through the music, through the score. Like filmmaking and storytelling encompasses so many disciplines, and we're going to go over each one of those disciplines at least broadly at Blue Sky, but it's all of that combined and working together to tell a moment or a moment in a character's life journey, and why this is so important for this character to go through this journey and what they have to learn, and to have the audience feel that. I think that's, if we can even touch that, that would be amazing. That would be awesome. That would be great storytelling.
When you're developing a film, like is the first thing you think of like the setting, and then you make the story like built around it, or is like the setting? I mean, yeah, the setting built around the story. Like what's the like what stages does the setting take place?
You guys have really good questions. I would say there isn't any one correct way to develop any idea or film. In the case of Rio, the filmmaker is Brazilian and he grew up in Rio. So a lot of the references that you're familiar with because you live there is like, was from his own sort of childhood and growing up there. And, you know, and, I won't speak for Carlos, but I know at least the feeling, like I worked directly with Carlos on that film. I was the supervising animator on that. And for Carlos, it was definitely like a love letter to Rio. This is a love letter to the city that he grew to love, he loves. And, that's the feeling he wanted. So many changes happened throughout the development of that project that are too numerous to name, but I will just say that they were drastically different. The story was different, but he did want it to be from Rio and the story to take place in Rio. So in that sense, I would say Rio came from setting first and maybe thematics and like character stories second. But absolutely, there's so many films that are, this is what I really want to like send out to the universe. This is the message I want to get. And I want to build a story and a setting based on that. Like that is a perfectly good way to develop an idea. So I would say there isn't really a one correct way of doing it. It's sort of managing your way, like your version of it, at least for the idea that you want to develop. Like, you just kind of have to like listen to your gut and sort of, sometimes the visuals might push it. Sometimes the message might push it. So, just kind of have to be open. Like there isn't one set way to do it. So next section is characters and environments. We start to get into the pipeline of it. And so almost everything you see in the movie is built by the modeling department. With Lance, after the 2D design's approved, we build a maquette. And, some of you might be asking, what's a maquette? A maquette is a three-dimensional sculpture a sculptor would create of a character. So this is our sculpt room, and our resident sculptor, Vicky, works with the character designers and the production designer to make sure that the 2D design translates into 3D. So, you could see there behind the glass, those are all the different characters we've built throughout the, sort of the movies that we've worked on. And here's a side-by-side of the 2D design that was approved and the finished approved maquette of Lance. And after the maquette is approved, you see that sort of square tubing underneath Lance's head there. Vicky scans it into the computer and passes it on to a 3D modeler. So each aspect of the process in this that I'm going to talk about, they're all super highly specialized. Vicky is like, she's an amazing sculptor. I could never do what Vicky does. And subsequently, like all the other departments that come after that, everybody's really hyper specialized in what they do. So I actually prepared some clips that where either the supervisor or the head of the department is going to talk about what their specific challenges were on Spy. So I'm going to play a quick video that talks a little bit about Lance and the modeling aspect of it.
On Spies in Disguise, style is everything, and no one embodies this more than the world's top super spy, Lance Sterling. Lance's stylized face has several hardline plane changes that presented a challenge for organic deformation. Through numerous model prototypes, a specialized topology was created that not only allowed these elements to coexist, but set the topological guidelines for all human characters of the show. Over 350 hand-sculpted targets give Lance a wide range of pushed expressions while maintaining the nuance of his statuesque design style.
So rigging is the next step. Rigging is the department responsible for creating the controls that allow the animators to animate and move the characters. So the rig is the same as like the strings that you might pull on like a traditional puppet, like a Pinocchio type puppet, except all of it's done digitally in the computer. So I like to think of it as like, you know, the riggers would be the ones that add the virtual bones and the muscles that would allow the animators to pose Lance, pose the body, and pose even the expressions, like pulling lip corners up and pulling the brows up, right down to the smallest details. Like, oh, I really want that furrow in his brow to read. Like, the animator will get all those controls. So for a main character like Lance, a rigging artist will literally place thousands and thousands of controls for the animators to animate, to access this 3D puppet. And that's something the animator needs to keep track of, you know, literally that many, not exaggerating. So it may take a rigging artist somewhere between 5 or more months to create a complete rig for a main character, just to give you guys an idea of sort of the time investment just for one main character. So next I have a short clip I wanted to play that talks a little bit about the specific challenges of Lance the pigeon. I'm going to play that.
Lance Bird had a highly stylized character design, and animation needed a custom rig to hit his clean graphic poses. A complex rigging system was developed to support the unique needs of his performance. The wing was stripped down into 3 regions referred to as tacos, flight feathers, and finger feathers. The tacos needed to be flexible enough to support the full range of motion for the wing, plus the large graphic shield shape when the wing was closed. A proprietary plugin was developed to assist in the QC pass, procedurally removing any feather penetration. To allow for wing performances that didn't limit the neck deformations, a cage-like low-resolution surface drove the main mesh, making it possible to hit a wide range of graphic poses. By using a NURB surface as the main driver, we could attach the wing and take advantage of the parametric space that comes free with it. A projection-based UV coordinate remapping system was developed so the wings and legs could be placed anywhere on Lance's body. A shrink wrap deformer was used to preserve the volume and kept the silhouette on model at all times. A special space blending system was developed, allowing us to art direct mouth shapes isolated from the neck.
Do the animators have any say in like what goes into the final rig, and how do you end up deciding what gets put into the final rig?
The animator will definitely request. It's not like the animator will, you know, can dictate exactly what needs to go in there. And there's definitely a back and forth. There's definitely like a balance between like, you know, the animator had their way. They would just, you know, pile on all these like controls to make it like, you know, because animators are like, you know, OCD about like detail. Like we just want control. And if it was up to the animators, this rig would not move because it's way too heavy to even use. Like for anybody who knows how to use computer rigs and knows how to animate, you know that there's a capacity, a limit to how much detail you can put into a rig before it starts to really be like it's too slow. It's too like it will get in the way of allowing the animator to actually animate. Like you want animation to feel as fluid in a way as the way the 2D animators used to animate, which is be able to flip between your poses very fluidly. If you have tons of stuff on the rig, that's not going to happen. And I've definitely animated on shows where it was way too cumbersome. We asked for way too much and we got to dictate way too much. So ideally there's a fine balance between like requests and like features put in. Who gets to finally decide? Hopefully the character lead and the character lead for both rigging and animation will have the foresight to find the right balance. Materials artists support the vision of the creative. So the production designer and the directors, and develop how everything looks. You know, we don't think about it, we take it for granted, but like textures on rocks, clothing, skin, everything you see in terms of texture, tables, like cars, everything has a texture, everything has a reflection. Materials artists are the ones who are responsible for that, and they're the experts behind all that. So I want to play a short clip that will talk about both the fur and the materials work on Lance.
Lance's groom consisted of approximately 90,000 generated feathers. Length-based mapping was used to control the look full feathers to single hairs. Custom ruffle zones were added to aid in the performance of Lance's emotions. Both ruffle and generator controls were used to procedurally give Lance a wet, disheveled look. Normals were generated from the skin to drive the shading of Lance's neck iridescence. By treating the feathers as a coherent surface rather than complex,
Everybody.
this gave shading artists more control over the fall.
Everything you see in the movie, again, needs to be built. So what happens if you need to build a whole city? Just think about it for a quick second. You've got hundreds and hundreds of buildings with detail, unique designs, colors, materials. And not only that, we're building a well-known city of San Marco Plaza in Venice with distinct, recognizable buildings. And if you thought that was hard, by the way, make sure it fits within the style of the movie. Like, how the heck would you do that? So I'm gonna let the experts talk about it, because I learned tons when I watched this video. So I'm gonna play a video for you guys, and I will try to answer any questions you might have.
Creating San Marco Plaza in Venice brought a unique challenge, recreating the accuracy of a widely known location that could still fit our stylized production design. In the modeling phase, Google Street View was used for reference and constructing low-resolution models. The design team then exaggerated internal proportions and skewed rectilinear forms like windows and doors. This maintained recognizable profiles of the iconic landmark buildings of St. Mark's Plaza. Using 38 unique building types, over 22,000 buildings were placed throughout the city with enough detail to be used for close-ups, but efficient enough for vista shots. Using our library of assets, such as doors and windows, we instanced shapes across models to save on render time and RAM usage. Next, artists added details through hierarchical instancing, allowing the same set to be used for 180 individual shots across 4 sequences. As Walter and Lance ventured deeper into the area, street lamps and other practical lights were switched off, transitioning from vibrant to mysterious. Lighting artists built tension by keeping Killian's identity concealed in shadow and silhouette, and created moments of triumph as the sunlight shines onto our heroes. From designing and procedurally creating thousands of buildings from a limited number of root assets to a strategic lighting approach, we made the San Marco Plaza both economical and visually breathtaking.
Next section is the layout. This is the camera and staging process. And for those of you who have worked either in documentary form or just live action shorts that you guys have made, a lot of this is very, very similar philosophically. We're just working with it in the computer. So for layout, the mission objectives are convey the information that the audience needs to know. So clarity. Help the audience understand character, situation, and motivation. So the goals in the sequence. Above all, remember that the main objective is to entertain the audience. So we also have to keep that in mind. And so their specific responsibilities are camera placement, camera movement, and camera blocking. So for the most part, I would say layout artists, even though they're working with a virtual camera, all the principles are the same. You know, you still have to decide whether it's an establishing shot, if it's a medium, or if it's a close-up. And often we still strive for the goal of the camera feeling grounded and feeling as real as possible. We tend to shy away from cameras that feel like that is clearly a CG, you know, a computer, a virtual camera, because a real camera could never do that. And I know some of the lines have been blurred because, you know, we have drone cameras now and things like that. But for the most part, we want it to feel like there's a camera operator behind these virtual cameras. And there are, but we don't, just because we can do something a real camera couldn't do, it doesn't mean you go ahead and do it right away. There has to be a very, very good reason to do that. So that's sort of the general philosophy behind that. Very quickly, you know, traditional lighting also kind of works in the same way. Like lighting artists will use light and color and framing and, you know, sort of focus to allow the audience to feel what we want them to feel. Specifically, probably, usually it's like allowing the audience to empathize and feel for the protagonist, Lance. Some stats from our lighting team. Average render time per frame is 117 hours per frame. It's 12.3 million frames used in the movie. And it takes about 3 weeks for a lead lighter to plan out the master lighting in a whole sequence. But it takes another 8 to 12 weeks for a lighting team, depending on the length of the sequence, to light and approve a whole sequence. So that's a team of lighting artists that would be working together with the art director and with the lighting supervisor. So I'm gonna go into another quick clip that talks about the layout and the lighting.
On Spies in Disguise, we had the challenge of telling a spy adventure story that had a family-friendly perspective. The directors strove to include those classic spy movie moments, but with a slight twinkle of whimsy. One objective was to ensure that the audience was as immersed as possible in the experience, to feel like they're in the car with our characters during the car chase through DC, or that they're in the thick of the battle at the climax of the movie. We wanted to give the movie a contemporary live-action feel by utilizing rapidly moving cameras combined with fast-cutting techniques. We placed thousands of lights throughout the city, providing visual variation, detail, and a sense of stylized realism. To give the visceral feeling of the light being captured by a camera lens, we introduced glows, flares, and dispersion. While each of these elements were evocative of a live-action car chase, we always maintained the clear character reads and visual flow you would expect from an animated film. The picturesque background of the Venice Plaza is the setting for a dramatic confrontation between our heroes and the villain. Skewed angles, imbalanced framing, and obscured viewpoints all help to communicate the roller coaster of emotions that our characters experience in the scene. The juxtaposition of cool sky lighting with the saturated warm light of a sunrise combines to emphasize the tension of the moment. As the scene reaches its dramatic climax, the lighting and camera unify into an idyllic composition containing the silhouetted, chaotic motion of our villain being swarmed by a pigeon tornado. During the action sequences, we wanted the camera and lighting to feel entirely reactive to the action to prevent the moment feeling too choreographed or rehearsed. In the climactic battle, the scene is set against a muted background of a crumbling manor house under an overcast sky. Judicious use of saturated color, backlighting, and effects-driven lighting help underscore the action and support the emotional beats of the battle. There was a consistent effort on our part to keep the camera feeling grounded and real, as if it were being operated by an actual person. While we usually relied on handheld cameras, we occasionally employed choreographed camera moves to emphasize the shifting power dynamics between the characters. While camera and lighting worked in concert to form the visual backbone of Spies, the directors also understood how to effectively utilize them to provide the emotional subtext that audiences have come to expect from today's animated movies.
Is it better to take art classes when trying to become an animator at school, or computer classes?
Art classes all the way. Listen, I mean, there isn't sort of just one direct answer, but like just generally, I would say the artistry is far more important than the medium itself. I mean, I told you guys my own experience was that I actually did not touch a computer until I was a junior in college, not even email. So, and then I jumped right onto an SGI, which you guys don't know what that is, but like, it's like not even a Mac or PC. It's like this completely like oblique, like way of like, you know, yeah, command lining everything, and just like it's much more technical than, it's not user friendly. So the medium, the computer, the software is always going to change and evolve, but the artistry, your eye and your knowledge and your observation skills and your acting skills and your storytelling skills, that will always transfer over, no matter if you're drawing with just pencil and paper or if you're using the most complicated software you've ever seen. That is gonna, you're gonna take that with you, and that's the real sort of like value in what you're learning. So the animators are the actors in the film. You know, animators are responsible for creating character performances that support the storytelling in the movie. So at the beginning of each project, the animators, at least in this project, they were handed a very detailed sort of dossier or character file on the character in the movie. So we need to know who the characters are, you know, what's their style, and from the design department, how they're supposed to look. For example, in each of these files included very descriptive personality breakdowns. You know, for Agent Lance Sterling, he's, you know, the epitome of balance and poise. He's always controlled, calculated, precise, and powerful. But much like Will Smith, he's also playful and very charming. So that's what we strive for. So knowing who these characters are and who they need to be, how the design needs to work, we need to translate those into principles and rules, into character specifics. So we create these pages for the animation department, and it allows animators to sort of understand in great detail the do's and don'ts of how to work with the character. And that's how we keep, 75 plus animators working in a very consistent way. So looking at these two images, both these images as standalone images work. There's nothing wrong with the left one per se, but for Lance, it is wrong because we think of Lance as somebody who, it takes minimum effort, has, again, full of confidence, swagger, and poise. And, even in the middle of a fight, he would not break a sweat. So the one on the right would feel more like a consistent Lance choice versus the one on the left. That's an Iron Man pose on the left. And like, yeah, that works for Iron Man, but for Lance, screen right one is the way to go. Just to give you an idea in terms of like, what are the different choices and why do I make this choice? So we also figure out sort of their best angles, much like a live action actor, they like to be shot in certain ways. So Lance likes to be shot in certain ways, like that 3/4 angle where his sort of backstage eye gets buried, not his best angle. We try to avoid those. We definitely did that on Peanuts characters. Like they look good in certain directions and that's what we stick with. So now it's time to define how we're going to move these characters. So early on, we definitely wanted to, an animation style to be clean, simple, graphic, like the design. So, we really leaned on the philosophy, the principle of clarity, clarity of posing, of movement, performance. So this is an early exploration of Lance running with sort of the show principles in mind, like clean, graphic, iconic. So this served sort of as a launch point for like, how stylized the movie can be. And any actor would know that seeing a character go through simple things is really character defining. Like how they walk is, I know it sounds really simple, but if you look at any person out there, nobody walks the same way as another person. Like everybody has a distinct walk. It's like a fingerprint. And in the same way, doing something, everyday tasks like sitting down on a chair, like, there has to be a specific way Lance would sit down that embodies his character. And so I want to go through sort of some of the versions that the animators went through. So this was the first pass. And, perfectly fine. Lance getting into the chair. There's some good ideas in there. The unbuttoning of the coat is a cool idea. The spinning of the chair is nice. But can we push it? Are there areas where, can we push more of the Lance-ness in there? And how do we get more fun and swagger and confidence in there? So this is where the second version comes in. The animator decided, yeah, maybe a finger push to this chair twirl and maybe a little kick to the way he crosses his leg is nice. It's nice. It's not as stiff as the first one, but, can we get more swagger in there? And, the director has actually often talked about Lance. Like, we always imagine him as a sort of a character that, the way he moves would be like, he would almost move to like an internal beat, an internal track, like he's listening to music all the time and letting that dictate his movement. So when the animator started to time the animation to that, to the beats and the syncopation, and I think in this case, he used like a Bruno Mars track, it really started to bring the personality out completely, and it really made a huge difference. So after those things in mind, this is what the test looked like. Add a little bit of a camera move, even more swagger, and it really started to, the musicality underneath that as an engine really starts to, become more Lance-like. And this is a test that we felt like was much more successful than the first one. And then the next shot I'm going to talk about is sort of a good example of something that might have started out as sort of a quick animation test that ended up being such a big part of the trailer that helped sell the movie. Kristen, who is the animator, initially wanted to sell quickly how Lance would, notice a spider, exterminate the threat, only for us to see that the real threat is just arriving. So that initial idea didn't last very long because, it wasn't really in character for Lance to care that much about a spider, for one thing, or to hang out at home reading a book. And spinning window, just felt out of place in a high rise. And we just needed a clearer threat for entertainment value and, something that's true to the material of like a high-tech spy movie. So with this in mind, the notes that she got from the filmmakers, she gathered around her, her crew of teammates, brainstormed, tried to come up with something else that really simplifies the idea down and focuses on like just one aspect of a chase, perhaps something that's exciting, something that feels inherent to the material. So in this version of it, you know, she added a killer robot, some spy gadgets, jumps out of a window, and true to the style principles of like a spy movie, you know. But in this case, you know, some of the notes that you might get if this was your scene would be like, well, you know, does the table tipping over, is that more complicated than it really needs to be? Like, am I looking at the table instead of a lens? You know, is the camera work as clean as it needs to be? Can we simplify that? And let's figure out a way, like, you know, the way he jumps out of the window, it feels a little awkward. You know, is there a more interesting way, a more athletic way for him to do that? Maybe try some slow motion out. So with those notes in mind, this is what Kristen came up with. You know, much more streamlined, you know, had a little fun with some slow motion there, you know, and kept sort of the Lance's exit with the helicopter as sort of straightforward as possible, you know, with Lance looking as poised as possible, despite all that. And this is what it looks like in the final render of it. This is how it looked in the trailer. So you can start to see and appreciate sort of the steps in the thinking process of animating one of these shots. Like effects artists, they're the ones who handle all the natural phenomena that you'd see. Again, something you might take for granted, but everything that you see in the film had to be labored over and lovingly made for the film. So things like rain don't just happen in computer animated movies. Snow, heat distortion, you know, fluids, water, you know, gases, you know, shattering of glass, any kind of destruction of like rubble and walls, debris, dust, all of that needs to be created. And, you know, in this department specifically, there's a high level of collaboration with the other departments like animation and camera and lighting and material. So very, very collaborative department. So here's a clip that I've prepared to specifically talk about the effects in Spies.
Spies in Disguise was a colossal undertaking featuring a massive scope and variety of effects and crowd shots that required precise art direction. Since fire played a large role in our film, we planned a pipeline where artists designed a library of simulations that could be daisy-chained to dress large areas of the environment. This allowed artists to control the height, shape, and behavior of fire while seamlessly integrating hero elements. Point clouds containing color and illumination data were generated from the emissive fields and fed into a lighting hierarchy system at render time. For slow motion shots, we developed a toolset to retime simulated data. Our tools interpolated and affected data at newly created time steps and filtered them to match the fidelity of input data. For the ocean shots, we opted for a flexible way to generate detailed foam patterns. We painted and affected points, which were then used to project foam textures onto the ocean surface. The point express data was used to evolve the foam over time. We developed a highly configurable squadron instancer to create the fleet of 15,000 drones. For large-scale splashes, the timing and transforms of the drones were used to instance sources for hero simulations as well as pre-simulated water elements. The collapsing drones required a high quality and performance simulation rig so that we could art direct their motion close to the camera. When developing our procedural flight path system, we only needed to place a few curves to generate over 1,000 individually directable flight paths that each drone followed without requiring simulation. We extended the system to delicately craft the flight paths of the birds. We then simulated their takeoffs and landings where they transitioned through a complex sequence of animations, which gave each bird a unique performance. This process culminated in Bird NATO. Specific behaviors were programmed for the birds in the funnel, on the ground, and converging into the tornado. We engineered a system that used animated meshes to direct the pigeons in a graphic and believable tornado formation.
So I'm currently working on an animated short that follows a teenager as he tries to save his younger brother. And I was wondering, because like I have to draw every movement frame by frame, like what's like some good tips to keep like the movement smooth and also like make it feel natural.
Smooth animation basically means having a unique image 24 times per second. You might have to make some choices, like, you know, if you want to focus on the animation, then by all means dive into like really getting into the nuance of the motion, making it smooth. But I would say that as somebody who used to look at a lot of reels to hire animators, if that's your aspiration. Smooth movement is not sort of required, like it's not the thing that I would look for. I would look for sort of like unique choices that make sense for the character, who that character is, whether he grew up with money, without money, if he grew up from a different country. It sort of informs the choices you would make that make it uniquely your own character in your short. And I haven't seen anything. I don't know what it's about. I mean, I know what it's about. He's about to save his brother, but you know, to add like that uniqueness to it, you know, it's not necessarily the smoothness. So, but if that's what you want to do, then, you know, I don't want to detract you from that, but I just want to say, like, in terms of what would draw my eye, it wouldn't necessarily be smooth movement. It'd be, wow, those are really interesting choices. I wouldn't have made those choices. That's a really cool way to do that. Or, you know, this filmmaker found an interesting way of doing that. You know, like that would catch my attention. And also the storytelling, like how you decide to tell the story of how the brother rescues his younger brother. Like there's a million different ways you could do that. And how do you decide to do that? I think will also catch my attention. Oh, again, unexpected would be where I would try to go with that.
For someone who just started learning animation, what are some free resources that you could recommend to take advantage of? And what are some habits that good animators have?
There are definitely books that I would recommend. You know, I started with the Animation Bible, like The Illusion of Life, written by Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnson. That's just a good way to sort of get like a, you know, the Disney version anyway of like animation. Richard Williams' book, The Animation Survival Kit. That's a great book, more for the techniques, like more practical instruction on how to execute a walk, a run. Like each one of these presents a very specific challenge and something that you can learn from. You know, sort of advice I would say is, well, number one is like, you know, you have to, I would say you have to be really honest with yourself and do some soul searching, because doing animation is really, you know, it's hard, right? And you got to be real with it. Like you have to love the meticulousness and the OCD-ness it takes to do this. And if you do, awesome, because it's such a fantastic medium, and I'm still in love with it 20 years into my career. And that's great. So some things I would say is like, be a good student of like observing, be a good student of film, and like just watch a film. Like, you know, the progression reel I showed you guys, we purposely took out the dialogue because it's a different experience to watch something without listening. You know, our brains are so accustomed to like all the tools that we're used to, like talking and the gestures and like the framing, but try to be cognizant of, you know, why did the filmmaker choose a close-up? Like, why that close? Why is something like fuzzy in the back? Why is it in focus? Why did they choose that costume? You remember now you guys know everything that a filmmaker puts in there was an intentional choice. There's a reason, hopefully, there's a reason behind it. Why is the shot so long? What did the filmmaker accomplish by making this a long shot? You know, did it give a specific experiential feeling of like being there at that moment, and not having cuts really makes you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm really there and I'm experiencing all these things as things are getting thrown at the character. Like, you know, like that, those are some of the things that you start to learn. So I think it's just being hungry and kind of absorbing all of it, because there's so much to learn. And then just kind of focusing. If you really want to pursue animation, you do need to start thinking about, animation is specifically about caricaturing motion, and why, you know, there's a reason why it's not a live action movie. There's a reason why it's animation. And typically it's because the filmmaker in the film wants you to experience it from a very specific point of view, a very specific prism of stylization. Like The Incredibles could have been a live action movie, but it was an animated movie for a reason. And, you know, Spies in Disguise easily could have been a live action movie. I mean, the line where live action stops and starts and where animation starts and stops is getting really fuzzy. You know, all these sort of remakes of like Lion King and Jungle Book, it's like, it was an animated movie, but now it's a live action movie, kind of. but it's also sort of an effects movies. Like there's lots of like in betweens, like Lord of the Rings. How much of that was computer generated and animated, and how much of it was live action? Like, you know, so learning how to caricature something, how to exaggerate something beyond naturalism, I think is also a skill set that you would need to develop. And again, you don't have to have it all figured out before you apply anywhere. It's something that you're going to learn. It's a muscle you're going to learn as you continue to do these things. Like Peanuts was totally different from Ice Age, and Ice Age is totally different from, you know, Spies. Like Rio, they're all very different styles of motion. So it's just a muscle you're going to learn to use.